This is the first, the joint NASPAA APPAM panel, and we've got a terrific panel today. I'm Brinton Milward. Aside from me, we've got a terrific panel. I'm Brinton Milward from the University of Arizona. I'm director of the School of Government and Public Policy. I think what I'll do is ask each one of our panelists to introduce themselves.
Nicole, Darnall, Arizona State University.
Rubenstein, Syracuse University.
Carolyn, University of Texas.
Great. Well, we've got an hour and a half today, and so plenty of time for a lot of discussion. And the topic again is the market for masters and doctoral students in public policy, administration, and affairs. What skills are in demand, and how well we are preparing students for learning in the future. So we have a big palette. We've got interesting presentations here. I think what we'll do is about 15 minutes per person. Does that work? 10 to 15? Okay. All right. We've got plenty of time. So I'm going to start, if I may, with Ross from Syracuse, and then go to Carolyn, Nicole, and now I'll back to you. And I should mention that Brian Jacob from University of Michigan is not here today.
Thanks very much. So I'm really happy to be here, mostly because if I wasn't on this panel, I would actually attend this session. So I'm not obviously that interested in what I have to say. I am very interested in what everybody else here has to say, so it probably won't take all that long because I really do want to open this up for discussion. I guess one thing I would note among the panelists, I'm a little bit of an outlier, I guess, because I'm the only one from a Northeastern school, and I'm also the only one from a private university. And so that actually may have some impact on what I have to say versus what the other panelists have to say, and obviously what everybody else has to say. And I think the geography, aside from the fact that maybe we'll get right, I think that's relevant because in terms of our market, we are very much, our location is important. It's sometimes a problem for us, but also in terms of where our students are looking, it does tend to be probably more focused on universities as opposed to some of the other schools that are represented here. So we had a series of questions that we proposed. I kind of went through those questions to think a little bit about them. So I guess my comments in that sense might be a little bit disjointed because I'm going to try and answer each of the questions that we proposed. And I hope to tie it together a little bit, and then also try and talk both about the master's and the PhD market, which are obviously very, very different markets and are facing different issues and different opportunities. First question was about the market and demand for our doctoral and master's students. So from where I sit, in terms of the doctoral program, it does look like the market has been fairly strong for the past, in recent years, and that's at least my perception of it. Generally speaking, we've had pretty good success placing doctoral students. If there were any, I know any of our doctoral students who are currently on the market would be happy to hear that. They probably wouldn't believe it because at the time they're getting particularly stressed about what's going to happen to them next year and beyond. But even though it sometimes takes a little bit of time, we've had some pretty good luck. But I think some trends that we've seen have been, well, I guess this is always the case in the PhD market. It's very specialized. It's very specific to individual students, their individual skills, and their individual field. And that also seems to be changing. So if you go back, at least to me, you go back 10, 15 years, or 20 years to when I was in graduate school, it seemed that the best advice was always do finance and budget. Because you will always find a job if you can teach budgeting and teach financial management. And that really was the case, I think, for a long time. I don't see that nearly as much these days as I used to. And if any of you, so we're also hiring right now, if any of you are hiring, and you're looking at the job listings, you can see that in public management, public and nonprofit management these days, I think every school, probably a lot of the schools represented here, are looking for people in public and nonprofit management. And so I'm not exactly sure what has led to that change. I don't know if it's maybe partly on the supply side, that maybe strange as it sounds, maybe flooded the market with people who do budgeting, finance, and quantitative analysis and those sorts of things. But there definitely seems to be a big demand from the management side. And also, I found on the hiring side that we do tend to compete a lot, I think, for a relatively small pool of the same students. So a lot of times there may be a big pool, but we're all sort of focusing on the same ones and competing for them. And I think that's probably natural, but it takes a little bit of time, usually, for the market to clear. It doesn't necessarily always work all that efficiently. On the master side, I think that we have seen fairly steady growth, but I think one of the big things we've seen is just a lot of variability across sectors in where our students go. I would imagine this is pretty common to most schools and most placements. So particularly with things going on in the economy, I would say the one fairly constant piece of it has been the demand in the nonprofit sector, and that's really, I think, helped to smooth things out because certainly, so a lot of our students are interested in state and local government, state and local finance in particular. That was a more or less dead market for a number of years, going back 3, 4, 5 years. So the federal government kind of picked up some of that slack. The nonprofit sector picked up some of that slack. The state and local now, I think, seems to be coming back, at least in the last year or two. Probably there's a lot of pent-up demand for those positions because they weren't hiring for so long. So now, actually, we've seen a big decline in federal government placements and a big increase in state and local. The one thing that we always have going for us is, in terms of also attracting students into our programs, it seems that there is no shortage still, or maybe even an increase in the number of students who want to save the world. And so those are the students who are attracted to our programs. But the way that they're going about doing that seems to be changing. And in particular, they seem to be, whether it's on the supply side where the jobs are, or whether this is in the student selection, they tend to be going much more heavily into the nonprofit sector to do that than they are into the government sector. So I'm sure all of you see this, and we all know the way the news really helps to, certainly has a negative impact in many cases on our ability to attract the kinds of students that we would like into government service. I think we find in our program that a lot of these students maybe come in without an interest or not interested in government service, and then during the course of their studies they may shift. But in the end, it also has a lot to do with where the jobs are. In terms of what skills are in demand and what skills we're thinking about, one thing I've kind of picked up on is a little bit of an interesting paradox in terms of what the students initially say and what helps them get that first job versus what seems to help them in the long term. So we did an alumni survey last spring, and some of the questions we asked were about the skills that they found most useful in their first jobs and in their current jobs. And when we talk to employers and we talk to students who have just gotten jobs, it's pretty constant, pretty consistent that they tell us the skills that got me the job were the quantitative skills, quantitative analysis, statistics, budgeting, financial management, all of those hard skills. But what's interesting is looking at the results of our alumni survey, it's very clear that the skills that our alums who are 5, 10, 15 or more years out say were most useful to them were things like conflict resolution, negotiation, management, working in teams, writing skills, writing short, succinct memos. So really the things that maybe they're not looking for initially, and quite honestly, some of the things I think we have difficulty selling the students on. It's fairly common, or it's not uncommon. We have students who say, I want to be a policy analyst, I just need quantitative skills, I don't need any of the management stuff, why do I have to take management? And so, well, now I'm in a position where I can say, well, look at me, because I was in the same position. I thought, I'm interested in policy research, I'm in my doctoral program, I'm going to get all the quantitative skills I can, I'm not interested in management, I'm not going to be a manager, so I avoided management courses just like they did. Now, I'm in charge of a department with 35 faculty and 9 staff and 400 students, and boy, do I wish I had taken some of those management courses. And so, I can point to my experience and say, don't do what I do. Do what I say, not what I do, in this case. Okay, and then I guess the last point I would make also in terms of the skill set and what's important is that another thing that came out from our alumni survey is that how difficult it is to predict where you will be in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. And so one of the interesting things we did is we asked the alums how many jobs they had had. And then we analyzed it by year of graduation, really decade of graduation. And so if you go back to the graduates from back in the 60s, 60s, 70s, even 80s to some extent, obviously they've had a number of jobs, but maybe 4 or so. For the median number of jobs for graduates for the 1990s was 5 jobs. So these are people who have been out for between 15 to 15, 20 years, roughly. And they've had a median number of jobs at 5, so roughly 4 years per job. And so again, I think this speaks to the fact that you really need those broad skills. And what really stood out to me in looking at the alumni survey was graduates for the past 5 years. So 90% of our graduates in the past 5 years had had 2 or 3 jobs just since graduation. And so that's stunning to me. Now I hope that's not because they were laid off or pushed that. I hope that was because they were moving up. But again, I think that speaks to me, I guess you can interpret this in lots of ways, but what that says to me in terms of training that we should be providing is, as much as the students may want to specialize and say, I know I am doing X, and so I will do Y and Z, I think it's sort of incumbent on us to say, no, actually, you should learn Y and Z because you don't know where you're going to be in 5 years, or 10 years, or 25 years. So I'm interested in how you play with this.
Thank you, Rob. Carolyn?
So I'm actually going to talk to the perspective of kind of multi-institutions. So my first economic job was at UNC Chapel Hill, and I was in the Department of Public Policy, where we had an undergraduate and a doctoral program and a master's program. And I went to University of Wisconsin-Madison, and there we had a master's program, but not a doctoral program. We also had a section in economics, and so there I had doctoral students there. Now I'm at the University of Texas at Austin, where we have masters, doctors, and I also have economics. I work with the doctoral students there, so kind of this perspective and seeing some of the kind of challenges. And a couple years ago, when I was the chairperson of institutional reps for APPAM, we convened a spring conference where we brought together employers from up and down the East Coast, because it was in DC and the DC area, and we were talking to them about what skills do you want from our master's and doctoral students. And so one of the, I think, and it's probably not going to surprise any of us here, but I think they made the point very clearly, and this was a collectively agreed upon point, that these days they are looking for, in our master's students, skill levels that they used to look for in doctoral students. So they have higher expectations for our master's degree students than they have in the past. And then the other point is sort of what Ross was saying, is that the quantitative skills, those kinds of practical skills, analytical skills are very important to them. But it's kind of interesting, you also mentioned the demand for public management at the doctoral level. So I think one of the things we experienced at Wisconsin was when I first arrived there, we had 2 tracks in the program. We had one that was policy analysis and one that was public management. And so students kind of sorted themselves, would do more analysis or more management. And we decided, looking at the market, that everybody should have some of both. And so we required everybody to do some policy analysis and public management. And I kind of think that sort of, so I think policy schools are now bringing public management people in when they hadn't. And so as you mentioned, there's kind of, I think both sets of skills are needed. The market's looking for the signal in terms of analytical skills in part, because things have changed a lot, particularly since I was a graduate student, where, when I worked in my research and I was working with a local equipment training office, I would go to their office and I'd be looking through files, and I got the records from the state on big reels and tape, and I had to download them and get them into something kind of storage at such tiny capacity. So now, things have really changed in terms of, and we're also seeing that in the nonprofit sector. They're under under pressure to show the metrics, right, that they are having impact on their populations for their funders. And so they're also looking for students to have those kinds, so that's where the analytics, I think, come in. But, you know, a lot of these, you almost have to, maybe it's an assumption that they're going to have the management skills, or, and so I think that that's something we've definitely seen, and I kind of, from my own perspective, strongly that we need to make sure our students don't specialize to an extent that they won't have the skills they need, even if, so they might be attracted, employer might be attracted to hire them by them having a strong set of analytical skills, but they're going to need those skills in management and all the ways that you described, Ross. The other thing I think that's been challenging, I've seen this across institutions I've been in, is trying to, how do we distinguish what we should be teaching our master's students from our doctoral students? And so at LBJ School, I'm teaching an advanced research methods class that's for our doctoral students, but increasingly letting in master's students who feel like they want to and can go to that level. And it also is kind of helpful because there's also a trade-off between, you know, how many doctoral students you take in and then having courses tailored to them. It's also an issue we're wrestling with right now in terms of what kinds of positions do we want to train our doctoral students for. So we kind of see a range in terms of applications. Some are interested in academics and going into research. Some want a PhD for qualification because they think they're going to have a better shot at writing when they write grant applications later if there's a PhD behind their name. And some want to have their own consulting firm. And so we're sort of in that, we're reflecting right now on our doctoral program about, you know, can you have a doctoral program that is very strong and meets the diverse needs of these different types of groups. So, you know, we're kind of thinking, should we be specializing more just in those interested in academics and research and not admit students who want a degree for that other reason? Because it's difficult to have a curriculum that meets the standards, like I said, the higher standards we have now for research skills, and also accommodate those who may be less interested in developing them for these other reasons. So I kind of see how there's challenges for us in terms of thinking about curriculum, but also, you know, trying, I think you have to be responsive to what the market is looking for. And so again, coming back to the market for doctoral students, we're also aware, and I think others have probably heard too, is that our doctoral students will compete for doctoral students from the other disciplines, right? So I also, in advising students in economics, a number of my economics students are applying to policy schools as well as to economics departments. And so it's another, I think, pressure upon us to make sure that our students can not just, you know, not just our curriculums are in line with the policy school, but we put out students who, for example, if their focus area is education policy, they go compete for those education policies with students trained in that area or trained in economics with that specialization. Brian and Jacob couldn't be here, but I think one thing I just here for those who may have had this experience, some policy programs and public administration programs are now, or schools are now having PhDs where they have, they get both a disciplinary PhD and policy. So Michigan does that. So everyone has to do both. I know, I don't know if anybody is here from Duke or Stanford School, but yeah, so, and I know your program, we have a student who, from our master's program to your doctoral program this year, and she was asked to choose a concentration, so a disciplinary concentration that she's in. So that might be another way our programs may be innovating to recognize that our students will be competing with students from a broader array of disciplines. So, you know, I also, you know, feel like the market is fairly strong, but, and again, the other area our master's students compete with, so are, for example, students from business schools. Also, and a number of, so in that master's department or at the University of Texas, Austin, they started 2 years ago a master's program in economics. So the University of Wisconsin, where I was, and so the master's program they're now starting, part of their money makers or departments, but they're also putting out students with some of the similar skills that we are needing for our master's students. Our master's students also compete with students coming out of business schools with MBA. So I think part of our challenge is to make sure we're understanding how our students are going to be distinct. So if the students in the master's program in economics and business also come with a good set of analytical skills, what do our students have to add in terms of value? I think that's where public management, understanding politics of policy making, those are the kinds of skills that we have to make sure they have in addition to being strong to the extent possible. And obviously, there's no one set of skills that every student is going to take away. And we have very diverse programs, and some of us have international and we have a policy studies program at LBJ as well as our Master of Public Affairs. So we are, but again, we're seeing more kind of, I think, more reasons for them to make sure they have key sets of skills regardless of which program you're in, and making ways to make sure that we are, again, still responsive to the types of jobs that we're looking for. So those are some issues I wanted to get out there.
So I'm going to tell some stories about what's happening in the ASU to directly answer some of the issues that this panel is intended to address. And I'll start by talking about the history of our program. It originally was a DPA, and about 10 years or more ago it became a PhD, the Doctoral program. And fair disclosure, I'm going to speak specifically about our PhD program. I served as the director of the program for the previous 2 years, and a lot of us know about what's happening in this resource. The typical cohort size at that time was between 12 and 15 students. It was quite big. And it was in large part because we were accepting full-time and part-time students. The part-time students were the primary individuals that were coming to the program. Many did not have ambitions to undertake research as part of their professional development. As Carolyn said, we were trying to span both camps and serve their needs. Funding for students, we funded about 2 students a year, and it was on a year-to-year basis, so there wasn't a lot of security for the students. And we primarily recruited students in Arizona and at the international level. And then things really began to change between 2010 and 2011. As just a point of notice of that change, since 2011, well, we have 24 faculty as part of the School of Public Affairs today. 17 of those faculty members have joined us within the last 3 years. So we've had enormous change within the program. And that has created lots of opportunity for reflection. Some of these changes, some of the very quick changes that we made was that we only accepted full-time faculty students who were then focused on research positions. We believe that we could serve both candidates. Perhaps I could, but we don't think that is well. And then we changed the PhD from a PhD in public administration to a PhD in public administration and public policy due to the very issues that two economists have been discussing about this perceived need that is on the marketplace for our students to be able to bridge both camps and to speak to both to scholars. We also began benchmarking our program against the top 25 public administration and public policy schools across the U.S. And what we learned really helped fuel the change within our own ranks. So one notable observation was at the point of entry, students were assigned to mentor really not to meet. The average time to graduation nationally for doctoral students was 5.1 years. For us, for the full-time students, it was 6+ years. For part-time students, it was 9+ years. The average stipend amongst our competing schools was $17,900 annually. And within ASU, as I mentioned, it was year-to-year funding, it was $14,500. And our competing schools require 2 policy courses. Getting back to the issue of technical skill, ASU required 1, and competing schools required 3 research methods classes, and we required 2. So this was a real point for us to step back and ask, what's the market demanding and how are we able to provide the talent necessary for today's market? So we're reflecting on what's happening on our doctoral program, but simultaneously we're hiring a lot of people. So we're understanding very well what sort of skills are being presented out there to us. And we have been incredibly fortunate to hire fantastic talent that has come to ASU. But one observation that we noticed amongst the individuals who were interviewing is we had our top recruits that were coming in. Well, I mean, really, everyone is a top recruit that came in. But we know when the interview process rolls out, there are clearly runners among these individuals coming in. And we were hoping that the distinction was going to be less. We were hoping that we would see far more front runners so that we would have more choice. So let me discuss now the things that we were hoping for amongst the candidates that we weren't seeing. We were looking for more rigorous methodological training, and this plays into the comments that we heard. We were looking for more hands-on research experience, especially related to quantitative research. Research that's rooted in the real world, individuals who were skilled and not just quantitative analysis, but one to pepper in qualitative analysis into the conversation, to provide rich stories that anchor their research better. And then simultaneously, individuals who are undertaking qualitative research to think about how they could consider a quantitative dimension of work as well. We were looking for the beginnings of a publication record, and we weren't always seeing it, especially within these well-sought-after fields like public and nonprofit management. We were just seeing less of a track record there. We were also looking for independence amongst the scholars that were interviewing with at ASU. While we understand there's a close relationship to the student between the student and the student's advisor, we wanted to hear more about the individual's research rather than collective research. We wanted the individuals to own what they were doing so we could get an understanding of how it was going to move forward. And then finally, we were interested in candidates that had more impact-focused research. That there's a lot of research that ultimately can end up on a shelf collecting dust. And we were really looking for candidates that were asking questions that could potentially change outcomes in society. So within parallel to this, so we have changes in the program, we have an enormous recruitment effort taking place, but we also had individuals who are coming up for tenure within the department. And with all of these new recruits, tenure expectations began to change in rapid speed. And that's had a variety of outcomes, but I'll speak to the 3 most salient. We were looking at individuals to have between 12 and 15 publications at the point that they came up for tenure, and a track record with publications in top-ranked journals. And we were worried about whether the new faculty hires we were looking at were going to be able to meet those expectations. So getting back to this notion of having a strong publication record, having those methodological skills, thinking independently. All of these things we believe were going to be vital towards them being successful at universities such as ours. So we also realized we were part of the problem, because as part of this benchmarking process, we knew that the students that we were putting out would likely not be able to compete for our own jobs. So as part of this reflection process, we started undertaking significant change, and this is still very much in process. We needed to create a system by which our students were going to get the skills that we ourselves were seeking. They needed a stronger publication record, and they didn't need to worry about funding. Because with the security that comes with having the RA-ship it gives them the freedom to explore and take the chances that they otherwise wouldn't be able to do. So now our students are signing mentors at the point of entry, and we've increased our stipends to about $18,300, above average, and we have opportunities for summer funding as well. We've increased our policy courses from 1 to 2, and we've increased our research methods requirements from 2 to 4. We've also radically shifted our examination procedures, believing that by doing so, we were going to create more competitive candidates in the marketplace. So we have our typical core exams over the 6 core classes, and that takes place over the course of a week. But when it came to the specialization exam, we felt this was a real opportunity to help our students get the skills that we ourselves were seeking from job candidates. So by the end of the second summer, they need to publish a specialization paper, which will be their first independently developed paper towards publication. It can then serve as a first essay in a 3-essay dissertation, thereby helping expedite the process through the program itself. We also, for the first time, developed metrics of student success. And it's a fairly long list of metrics. And the doctoral committee is now meeting with each student individually to benchmark what they've done in the previous year against our expectations for student success. And then as a committee, collectively advising students on how they should refocus their attention for next year, or frankly, pat them on the back for the great work that some of our students are doing. So this is very much a work in progress. We're still waiting to see how this is going to roll out. But we knew fundamentally that change was needed, not within our own ranks, but we also believe collectively that's the case. We're looking for students with stronger methodological training, more experience with funded research, more publication experience, and greater focus on independence and impactful research.
Thank you, Nicole. Would you turn me?
I can tell you.
Okay.
My name is Heinrich.
Hold up.
Okay.
That's what everybody else. This has really been a very interesting panel. I've learned a tremendous amount. And people have had different takes on sort of the mandate that we were given to discuss today. I tore mine up last night because of a question that was asked in another panel. And Craig Shin from Portland State asked a group of deans and directors yesterday at a rebranding panel, what organizational theory sort of guided you when you were changing your School of Public Affairs, School of Government and Public Policy, whatever it was. So we had the dean at Milward School at Georgetown, Darnall at USC, and also we had George Mason represented and the University of Arizona. All three had gone through major organizational changes. So I stayed up last night. Insomnia is something I deal with. And trying to figure out, in sort of retrospective sense-making, what organizational theory and non-organizational theorists sort of really guided us at the University of Arizona when we underwent a near-death experience 5 years ago when the business school decided they no longer wanted public administration, public policy. And we were able to merge. We put together a committee, a white paper, and merged with political science. And I think out of that, I'm not sure this guided me at the time, but in looking back at what we did and trying to make sense out of the decisions that we made, it was a very simple organizational model, which was the key to success in the new American public university that is dependent less and less on state funding. And we've gone from about 33% state funding in 2007 to now we're at 17%, and I would guess my school is closer to 11% state funding. It had to be, the organizational theory was scope and scale. And so what we had to do was to figure out in the context of our PhD program, which is that's the jewel in the crown, our MPA program and other master's programs, and then our undergraduate programs. And just to give you an idea of what the school is like, we have 1,800 undergraduate majors in 4 different degree programs. We've got 800 in political science. We've got 300 in 300 in public administration, public management and policy, and in just 15 months we've gone from 0 to almost 600 in criminal justice studies. And the rest are in a new BA in law, which is joint with the law school, the first undergraduate law program in the country, where you take pre-law courses in our political science with our political science faculty, and then your senior year is actually spent in the law school taking first-year law school courses. At which point you can stop with your BA in law, and that's the model in most of the world, or you can get expedited entry into the law school. So it's a very innovative program. We anticipate we'll have 500 majors in that within a few years. So we've got this large undergraduate base. That's sort of the scale. The scope is the number of degrees. And then so when we get to the purpose of our panel, which is master's and doctoral degrees, at the master's level, when we were in business school, the other college management, we had about 50 to 60 MPAs full-time. We supported many of them. They came from all over the country. After sort of after the Great Recession, this was clearly a business model that did not work for us. We needed more master's students, and we couldn't afford to fund them. So what we did was we moved very aggressively to find a downtown location that was close to government and nonprofits, and we moved into a downtown facility with the support and help of the universities. And so we offer our MPA now completely in the evenings, and most of our students are part-time. Still a large number of people who don't necessarily want to be in the public service, but who want to save the world. We have one of the largest groups at the University of Arizona who are ex-Peace Corps volunteers, Teach for America. A lot of these people are in the program. So that's going very well. It's gone from, I think, 50 in the last year we were in business school to 100 now in our cap. We just can't take anymore. So what do you do with your cap? Well, one of the things we're known for around the world is our specializations, collaborative governance, network analysis, and conflict resolution, particularly within an institutional context. So what we did was we created a graduate certificate in collaborative governance. It's headed by one of my faculty members, Kirk Emerson. And the thing that's really interesting about this is that it's delivered in two modalities. On the one hand, it's available anywhere in the world, 12 hours graduate credit online. But we also found there was a tremendous internal market within the university. So you have all these, University of Arizona is a big science university. So you've got renewable natural resources, you've got a huge school but you've got a huge program that's interdisciplinary called Institute of the Environment. And you've also got hydrology, you've got all these other programs that need governance. And so what we're finding is we're getting a lot of people in other programs, including education, who decided that their specialization in a master's level program, and in some cases a PhD, will be our certificate of collaborative governance, which we can offer online or on campus. We can offer sort of in hybrid sessions. We can do it intensively, and it's really working out to be a marvelous innovation for us. Of sort of being able to grow our master's level offerings without exceeding the capacity of our MPA program. So that's what we're doing at the master's level. In addition, we have a master's in international security studies that is all online. It's at about 125 all over the world, mostly. They come through Fort Huachuca, which is the National Intelligence Center in Sierra Vista, Arizona. They sign up there, we have a partnership with them, and then they go off wherever their assignments are around the world and take this program. At the PhD level, we've been going through some of the same soul searching that we've had at ASU. We had a very strong, narrow PhD program for a number of years. So we had initial placements when we were in the business school. We had 2 people at Columbia, one at Duke, Georgia Tech, a number of really good places, universities in Mexico. And so we wanted to make sure that we kept that up when we merged. And we found that we were able to get more doctoral students, and we found that a lot of the political scientists who were, it's a program with 2 degrees, PhD in political science, PhD in public policy and management. but they take a lot of similar courses. We also found a lot of the international relations students were really interested in governance and organizations. And then we also found proximity explains a lot in life. I'm a network person, and one of the central findings of network analysis. Proximity and mobility really explains a lot. So the sociology department is on the 4th floor of our building, we're on the 3rd floor. It's a very, very strong sociology department, typically ranked in the top 10, top 15 in the country. Strongly oriented toward institutions, network analysis. And so one of the things that we've done is we've worked with people in sociology so that many of our students get the disciplinary training in sociology, particularly extremely rigorous studies. Charles Reagan was there with QCA, Ron Breider, the former editor of Social Networks. So our students were really getting first-rate methodological training. That, in many cases, was their area, sort of their second area in the PhD program. And so we're trying to work the other way, and we have a number of sociology students who are now doing the same thing in our PhD program. And in fact, one has just interviewed at American University School of Public Service, and they're looking more and more for public policy programs to find jobs in, and at the same time also in nonprofit management, which the sociology department is doing. Joe Gillespie is there. So that's what we're trying to do. The goal, scope, and scale, I think, says it very well. I don't know, after the new elections in Arizona, I don't think we're going to get any more money from the state government than we've gotten, and I think we're probably going to get quite a bit less. We've got about $1 billion structural deficit in the state. I wouldn't be surprised to see University of Arizona and Arizona State University becoming essentially privatized schools. I don't know how this happens. I'm sort of the perspective that we ought to have a leverage buyout and take both of them private. Because, the state gives us innumerable regulations and restrictions and damn little in terms of resources. So I think that's going to be the future. The other thing I should mention that I really forgot about with the master's program, and it's certainly the case with the undergraduate program, is that we get program fees on every one of these 1,800 majors. So we get program fees of, right now, it will be $900 a year for each one of these majors. In addition, we have the budgeting system, responsibility center management, which basically pays you for the number of majors you have, and the number of graduates you have, and the number of student credit hours you generate in some kind of formula. That brings in a lot of money. The master's program, we have a $2,500 a year program fee on the MPA, and one of the things we do with this is we push that back into the program. That provides a whole set of services that state funding would never provide. So those allow us a great deal of flexibility, and then from outreach programs like the Masters in International Security Studies, that's, like I said, we get 70 cents on every dollar from all the money that comes in there. And we hope, and the Masters in Public Policy, which will start next year, we have a new director of it, Laura Beckinson from Yale. And it is, we want to see that do the same thing that our MBA has. We want to see if we can find ways to partner with other departments there as well to take some of the classes in the MPP. So that's what's going on at the University of Arizona. And I'll open it up for questions. Yes. I'm sorry, behind you. You're next.
Ross and Carolyn. At Duke, we're seeing the market for our master's program students moving up to the private sector. And I didn't know if other people are seeing that trend. Is that troublesome? Is it wonderful? I don't know, because that, with the tremendous fall off in federal employment, it's flat, state and local, and then we don't really do much nonprofit. That's who wants to hire our students, and they're liking it. And I don't know if that's a conflict with our purpose. How are you seeing that, and then what do you think about it?
Sure. Well, we've always had a pretty good number of students who work in the private sector. Not huge, but it's maybe 10% roughly. Hasn't changed substantially in recent years. But I think it's important also to keep in mind the sorts of private sector jobs they're going into. They're almost always public sector focused. So consulting, specifically in the public sector practice, or working in municipal laundry. So the skills that we're getting from our programs are still working for them. I think one of the difficulties is that, maybe it's not a difficulty, from the student's perspective, I think it's a good thing, that a lot of consulting firms and private sector firms just have a lot more flexibility. And so they're able to come in, so we have a one-year program. And so the students essentially have to be looking for a job almost from the second they arrive. And so the consulting firms, of course, know what they're doing. The private sector, they can come in the fall and pick off the best students and lock them up because they can say, okay, we can wait 8 months, 9 months for you to start. And typically governments can't do that, and even less in nonprofit NGOs. So that's probably the piece that worries me more, isn't necessarily the number that are going into the private sector as much as the fact that they're able to really, I think, take the best students immediately because of flexibility.
I would add that I think, so in terms of, I mean, we know that Brinton and I have talked to Elizabeth Brinton about this, the fact that more public sector work is being, put out in public-private partnerships. So you have, private organizations working with child welfare agencies on how to improve their performance and help them manage their caseloads. You have lots of good private research organizations who are doing a lot where government is contracting out important projects. So I actually have a lot of connections with those organizations like Mathematica, Impact International, and APPAM and others that are working closely with government agencies, and they'll bring us in academics as technical advisors. But so I have, so I can't literally train enough students for all the calls I get for that kind of work from these organizations. And they are using many of our core program skills. So program evaluations that they might teach that, again, very high demand, some analytical skills we've been talking about, but also you need to have the management skills if you're going to move up in those organizations. So there's lots of tremendously interesting projects of work that you can do, for example, within Mathematica or MDRC or others, and those management skills will be important for the students to moving up. Now, it is a different environment, and it is a consulting environment. So I've had many students who have taken this pathway and then reached back to me and trying to figure out is this what they want to do, and even within those organizations you can get put in positions where you have more latitude for creativity and to really use those kinds of skills, and there's others where you can get into positions where you are only seeing one component and it's not very interesting and it's not really using their skill set. So I think to your point, Ross, that it really matters what type of private organization. Is that nonprofits are being pushed to do more of what private organizations have had to do in terms of, private organizations have profits as their bottom line, but nonprofits are struggling with this. So I think I actually see kind of there's more similarities, I think, in skills needed for these different sectors than there has been in the past. So even thinking of the government as well. And so I actually don't see it necessarily as a problem unless it's a case that the student really wanted to be in, to have a, there are some that have a passion for public service and want to be in the government sector. If the job isn't there, the hope is that later they can move. So I've seen a number of my students actually move in and out of those roles. And so when opportunities there, and then sometimes they've developed some really good skills in the private organization that then are appreciated as well.
Yeah, Jonathan Anderson from Cal State University, San Bernardino. Of the PhD and the MPA markets, I was interested in what are the skill sets required. I see different markets that are out there. Where, Nicole, you said you're looking to hire people, you're looking to train people who you would hire. This is commonly what research-oriented universities do. And the fact is that there's a large number of jobs out there that are not Research One jobs. And if you're only training for the Research One, that's the ones that are going to be offered. I'm a mid-tier Cal State University. I'm looking for a broader skill set. We hired last year, I wanted multiple ability to teach multiple classes, different kinds of things. The students, the candidates that you would have seen as the top tier for the jobs you were going to be hiring, I would not have put in the top tier of what I were hiring. So we got different markets there on that. Secondly, on the MPA markets, I think, and it was alluded to, I think, earlier, that the quantitative analytical skills perhaps are the ones looked for the pre-service students and the ones looking for the first job. But the in-service students and the ones who are looking for promotion, it's the managerial skills, it's the soft skills, it's the conceptual skills, it's the strategic skills, and whether or not they have in-depth statistical abilities, quantitative abilities, is not going to affect their promotion. It's not what they're looking for. So I'm seeing just different markets, not right or wrong, but I'm seeing the pre-service and the in-service market in the MPA, and I'm seeing Research One and non-Research One in terms of the PhD.
I can only speak very briefly to the Research One distinction. One thing that we have noticed with respect to our doctoral students moving forward, and I'm speaking now not just of ASU, but at my previous institution where I worked at George Mason University, where there were a sizable number of students there who were very much interested in going to a different sort of university than the sort of university we are trying to turn our students out to now. I think that our students at that time were very surprised when they started talking with more teaching-focused universities how much research was still emphasized. And I think that it's really easy, at least my inference from talking with the students, they bifurcate this as one of two tracks, being purely research or purely teaching. And I think that there is wiggle room in between. So to your point related to, well, how do we train students in a way that would make them attractive for an institution such as your own? What I think is it becomes critical for us to do, because we still are going to invoke our expectations for research and technical skill and the like. But then when it comes to, so I mentioned we have the funding packages, and students are guaranteed 4 years of funding. We need to work with the students in a much more strategic way, such that their research assignment or their assignment attached to that funding is going to meet a career objective, such that they get broad exposure to teaching that your institution would be looking for. But it requires a bit of strategic foresight on the part of the student that many don't have at the point of entry, and that's what makes this challenging.
So I'm Susan Kahn from the Ford School of University of Michigan. I have two quick comments and then a question. The first comment was on the PhD program. About 15 years ago, we did recraft our PhD into a joint program so that students have to be jointly enrolled in either economics, political science, sociology, and public policy. So in one of those, we found it to be really successful, both in terms of the growing number of applications, but also in terms of the placement opportunities. The other quick comment was about the issue of the growth in the private sector interest in our graduates. So I fully agree with the comments that the panelists made. We see it as a real plus in the sense that the value of the degree seems to be becoming more visible. And so the fact that a wider range of employers are coming to us, we actually think is a good thing, especially in this period when federal jobs have really dried up. And so the versatility seems to be strong. We hope that those students who we really prefer to be in a different type of position are able to move. So my question, though, is just a general one for the panelists. At the master's level, we've seen an increase in the number of our students who come from abroad. I suspect that's a general experience as well, and they bring a lot of wonderful dimensions to our program. At the same time, some of those students who are hoping to stay in the U.S. are often somewhat more challenging in terms of finding good matches. And I wonder if you could comment on your experiences there, any suggestions, lessons that you're seeing.
You may have your answers.
So I think one of the challenges we find, like as you said, some will go back, but a lot of them do want to stay. And so one of the things that the things they've communicated to us is they enter into, for example, the policy making classes or those classes without as much institutional background on our systems, right? And so, or teaching public management. So those are some areas where some of them may, it's more challenging class for them. And then also to understand once they're out there, kind of, the nature of the institutions, where they're going, and a lot of them, I think, our experience with them do come in with very strong analytical skills. And so some of them, I think, kind of see them building off of that in their career path. But in terms of, some of the writing's challenging. We have that support in our programs for them with the writing. But other than that, I haven't really seen, gotten into perspective that they're having more challenges once they get in the job market. Unless, like I said, unless they're trying to write in the government, and that institutional environment is a little more challenging. I would also love, since Susan's here, if you could, one question I had, and Brian couldn't make it because of family obligation, but one of the things I was interested in hearing is, are you finding your doctoral students who go out with both the kind of disciplinary, are some of them also getting positions in disciplinary departments, or are they mostly still in the policy market, or how are they using that? How are they using that to their advantage when they go out on the job market?
So it's a very small program. We're admitting roughly 2 students in each of the disciplinary areas.
How many disciplinary areas? How many disciplinary areas?
Study economics, political science, and sociology.
Okay.
Some of our recent, and Andrew is here as well. Okay. So some of our recent placements have been in disciplinary departments, have been quite a range. So some folks have gone into the foundation sector, some folks have gone into government, a number have gone into academic departments, not into disciplinary departments, but there have been certainly some who have gone into assistant professor position in their discipline. Right? So we've actually had a pretty wide range, which has been a plus.
So you see it also as kind of expanding opportunities at that level.
Yeah, each one is somewhat different because they leverage the connections in different ways. So
Sure.
it's hard to generalize a little bit. It really depends on what the students choose to do with the opportunities that they have between the board school and the department.
Have you seen specialization in, so do you have disproportionately more in econ, political science, and sociology, or has it been kind of even there?
Even across. And so in economics, which I know better, we have folks who've gone in international development and they're doing RCTs and, and then we have folks who've gone in social policy. So there's a pretty wide range of it. Pretty good cases. I'm happy to talk to you.
Yeah.
All of the questions, I'm sorry, did you?
I was going to jump in on the international student issue, just brief comment. So I think what we find is really the issues are less on the academic side and more on the social side. So we have a cohort approach. So all of our students in the MPA program, at least, they start the same day, they graduate the same day. They form a very strong bond with the program we're trying to establish explicitly in the program. And so we tend to try to be very careful to make sure that we have a very diverse student body along so that everything that we can possibly think of. And that includes not having too many students from the same country, not having too many students who came to us from the same group. So that's part of it, but what we tend to find is that they're very integrated with each other across generations, if you want to call it that. So in other words, they're in touch with the students who were here last year, from the same country, in the previous year. I just recently found out that they pass the same house along to each other from year to year. And so that works well for them, but I think also works against more fully integrating them into the program with their peers, and that's something moving forward that I think we're going to focus more on.
I see 3 hands on this side of the room. Are there any over here? I just want to make sure I'm not biased against this side of the room. Okay, yes, and then Jim Perry.
So one of the things that I'm a little bit concerned about is the growth in PhD programs and policy. When we started from a place where the MPP was really the terminal degree, with the exception of a very small number of people who then went on and got PhDs. And the idea was that it was really supposed to be very solid professional training for these analytical positions. And what I seem to have seen over time is the students in the MPP program. First of all, I think that the idea of the degree was somewhat oversold, and particularly as the degree programs accepted people from more and more diverse backgrounds. And so, thinking in part about my own MPP training and then PhD training, I think at the MPP level, a lot of people learn just enough to be dangerous. And I don't think that you can make somebody an econometrician who comes in as a dance major in a couple of years and So then I think what happened was people started to feel that they'd gotten this degree, but in fact it had not gotten them to where they thought they were going to be with the degree in terms of technical training, and then started to think, oh gee, maybe I need to go back and get a PhD. Plus, of course, there is degree inflation going on, or credential inflation. So I'm kind of concerned that the growth in the PhD programs in these fields, but particularly in public policy, are really kind of cannibalizing the substance of the MPP, what the MPP was supposed to be. So instead of actually shoring up the MPP, what we did was layer on this additional training. And it worries me a little bit in terms of the implications for the actual MPP job market.
Can I throw that back at you? How would you shore up the MPP if you can't take a dance major and make the dance major a competent policy analyst?
Well, I think that's what you have to figure out how to do. I think
so maybe the problem is with the degree and not necessarily with the fact that PhDs in policy have grown up.
Well, I'm saying I think that instead of going back and fixing the MPP degree, what we did as institutions, I got my MPP and then my PhD at Berkeley, and they certainly, when I got my MPP at Berkeley, there were almost no PhDs in that program, in that school. And now there are a fairly large number. And my concern is just that we kind of shifted our attention. And I think particularly in APPAM, there's really almost no space for MPP students in the APPAM world. It's really all focused on PhDs. And I think that's kind of unfortunate. I think, that we really should be thinking more about making sure that the MPP degree actually means something.
I think it goes a little bit back to one of the points I made earlier about demand by employers, right? So, this is what we're struggling with now, in that we're seeing more and more students telling us they want a PhD. Like I said, it's not necessarily because they want to get the job. It's a credential that more want. And a PhD is expensive to support a PhD student, especially as Nicole was mentioning. If you're going to compete for the best, we know our peers are being very generous, fellowship, multi-year fellowship offers. And you can only do that for a limited number, and we're all competing for, money. We lose students to Michigan, we lose students to other great places. So part of it is also the fact that you want to put those kinds of resources in the strongest students, because it is a lot of resources that you do. But then there are students who come to us and say, I'll self-fund, I want to do that PhD program. But then we can also, they may not want to meet the standards, as Nicole was describing, of a course. So I think we're wrestling with it. You were wrestling with that in some sense at ASU. And I've actually, so like I said, I was mentioning I allow some master's students into our advanced research methods course. Some of them come out equally well prepared, I think, as the PhD students do that kind of work. So again, there's this, I don't see, I mean, part of it is, I think where I'm thinking we have to kind of draw a line is what are their objectives? And again, there's lots of variation of programs out there, and I think part of it, students do have to select into programs that fit them well. You know, some programs have a reputation of being very rigorous, high expectations, and maybe more disciplinary focused in one area than another. So as part of the student sorting process, there is, you know, we have the same questions about resources. If you put more resources in the PhD program, what does it do for your master's students? We do try in WJ school. One of the things I think we found is that our master's students are coming in wanting the research experience, and we want to give the master's students those opportunities as well. And that comes in part from having funded research projects like Nicole was talking about. That's where we're getting some of our resources to support our master's students to get that kind of experience, because it's a challenge going forward. I mean, what you pointed out.
Jim?
This question is
And then in the back, right?
to Nicole. I think you said that your expectations for junior faculty are 12 to 15 high-quality publications by tenure.
So 12 to 15 with an expectation that some of them are going to be published in top journals.
Oh, that's
Not all of them.
That's a lot different. I'm also editor and chief of public administration review, and you also referred to this whole issue of impact and the research making the difference.
Right.
And of course, we see about 500 manuscripts a year, so we can I can draw my own conclusions about how impactful most of those are. I'm wondering whether that sort of target and that I don't know if that's an aspiration, a target, a goal for the junior faculty, whether that might not be counterproductive or run contrary to this goal of impact or influence. That the goal is the slice and dice databases and the smallest unit to get the most publications. And again, I would rather, as the editor, not be seeing that stuff. I would rather see impactful stuff. So the issue, maybe you all might be able to comment on that in terms of expectations for junior faculty. But it seems to me that they might run contrary to one another.
I think that they really can. And I can say when I was a junior faculty member,
So why would we do that?
Well, so I think the key is to engage our students in research early on that does have impact, so then they have some choice about the direction and how they want to focus their own research. That previously, our doctoral students, as I mentioned, they weren't assigned mentors at the point of entry. By the time they came up with a research project, it was typically about the third year. It's a little late in the game. And so they just weren't, well, I mentioned it took about 6 years on average for our doctoral students to graduate. And that would have been fine if they were getting the jobs they wanted, but they often weren't. So the time wasn't necessarily beneficial to them. But getting back to your central question, we're ratcheting up expectations. And does that create perverse incentives along the way to diminish impactful research? I think that you're absolutely right. There is a tendency for that. And that will be a challenge for us to manage. More of our research at ASU is sponsored research. So my hope is that we're already at a better starting place because of that, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee inoculation to what you just spoke of.
One of the things that we're facing, because we're in an interdisciplinary school with public policy, public management, political science, and within political science, all of the subfields, is that a lot of the doctoral students and a lot of the young faculty we've hired 10 new faculty in the last 4 years, we're really looking for people who have some foot in the discipline. I mean, you'll see more and more of this, people who are public management people who are also publishing in political science, and some of the top journals in political science. Journal of Politics is located at the University of Arizona, as is the Policy Studies Journal. And so you see both doctoral students and our young faculty sort of gravitating to across disciplines, which is really interesting. And the other thing we're finding is that one of the places of greatest convergence between public policy and political science is through international relations. So the international relations subfield of political science really has far more in common with a lot of the work in public policy than I would have thought before we joined forces. So we're starting to see publications across more interdisciplinary things in public policy and more policy-oriented things in the international relations. And then we have in the back in red.
I'm Laura Bloomberg. I'm at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, the associate dean there. And I have one observation and then a question. I think some of your comments about funding and the possibility of thinking about privatizing in some ways because of state funding are really, they're forefront in my mind, and I think it's a big conversation right now. And one of the things that concerns me is that we might be losing this long debate about whether graduate education in particular is a private good or a public good. And the extent to which we can argue that we're preparing people to create something that has public value is something that I think we really need to keep front and center, particularly post-election. I have a colleague who's our dean of the graduate school at the University of Minnesota who just came back from a year at the National Academies as a consultant. And he said it's striking to him, inside the beltway, if you will, how much the conversation about graduate school has turned towards it being a private good. So as we talk about the employability of students, of course we want that, and we want them to earn a living wage, but we also want to keep open the fact that we're creating something of general public value. Now my question is about internal funding and our need to think about interdisciplinary environments where we prepare people who are really ready for the marketplace. So I think that we all know, and many of the panelists talked about, cross-training and making sure that our graduates have the ability to interact in a heterogeneous environment with epidemiologists or climate change experts or engineers, and they need to be able to talk and interact and form teams with those people. And yet, when we create those heterogeneous environments in our universities, many of us are kind of hamstrung by the budget model that really encourages us to kind of go it alone. Again, we're thinking kind of private good. We've got the tuition revenue that accrues to our school. And I'm wondering if anybody has creative stories of how that's been counteracted, how we're changing that revenue model in ways that allows more heterogeneous interdisciplinary learning environments. Or if it's just a challenge for all of us. Or maybe we need a revolution.
I would love the answer to this question.
Well, let me give you an example from the area of national defense. A number of us are funded by the Department of Defense or the National Science Foundation to study the topic of adversarial networks, whether they're cyber networks or whether they're human networks. We have a lot of people at the University of Arizona who are working in this area. And so what we've done is, again, all this is funded research in a number of different departments, but what we've done is created an interdisciplinary workshop that meets every 2 weeks during the academic year that I chair. And what we do is we have people from engineering, we have people from the Institute of the Environment, we have people from sociology, we occasionally have people from economics, as well as the School of Government and Public Policy. And what we do is it's a reading workshop. We read interesting things that are interdisciplinary. It's paid for out of the grants the individual grants that we all have. And all of our funders love the fact that we're trying to build human capital in the area of people who are studying national defense and national security. The other thing we do is a wonderful forum for people, particularly doctoral students, to give presentations that they're going to be giving at conferences like APPAM before. It's also a great venue for people who are writing the white papers who are submitting them for the Minerva competition. To get really good people giving, and a diverse set of people giving their take on what those pre-proposals are going to look like. So that's the only example that I can think of. But all the program officers, even though this is funded out of a number of different pots, we've never had any complaints whatsoever. In fact, it's been one of the reasons that we continue to generate funding.
I would just add to that too. I think that so research centers can also be a mechanism for that. When I was at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, the Institute for Research on Poverty, now that has a core grant that we compete with there, and also had some matching money from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. One thing that we created there was, we called it the research fellows, or exact term. They were fellows, graduate research fellows, that's what it was. And so I had 40 plus students from probably 8 different departments on campus. They were all doctoral students. It was really great. I think similar to what Brent was saying, we would have speakers come. So, Kathy Edom would come, and she's a qualitative research fellow, and she'd be speaking to those who were economists, as well as the sociologists, and those doing educational or agricultural economics. So it was really interesting to have students have that experience of engaging with scholars of different disciplines. We also had sometimes we focus on methods, and the methods gain a perspective. We had health researchers there as well. One of the things that we're doing right now at the University of Texas at Austin, so we have a brand new medical school that's being built right now that's kicking off. We have not previously had a medical school. And one of the realities as they started to think about the medical school is that, medical training is just not about how you heal the patient. These days, doctors have to deal with all kinds of things related to the patient's social and their environments that they're living in, economic and social, how their healthcare is being funded, those kinds of pressures. And so there's a conscious effort in the development of that new curriculum to have a third year where medical students have to get out and pick another disciplinary type of training and engage in. There's economics or policy, and then through a research partnership that we developed with the Seton Healthcare System, which is put a significant amount of the money into the new medical school, is through that research partnership we are trying to see interdisciplinary collaborations across, within the campus, and then with those who are coming in at the medical school, but to also give students an opportunity to engage in those areas of research where they've been working with. And so for healthcare, it's an area where really it is, the challenges there cannot be met if you only have medical training, if you only have, you look at it from the perspective of health economics. So, I think we are having to get creative in how to do that. And I think Brent's point about, so we have the research partnership is being funded by the Seton Healthcare family, but they're also, putting money into the university as well. And so these are, it is a challenge because we've all noted if you're in a public university like we are, we're all having to do more with less.
Is there anybody on this side being better? Did you just come here to sleep? Sure? Okay.
I just have an additional comment to your question. I'm Kate Callahan from the Joslin School of Public Affairs at Ohio State, so big public university. And what we've been able to do over the past, well, it started a long time ago where we had fewer core faculty when the program was much smaller. We had 6 faculty when we were in the political science department. And when we left the political science department, then in order to have qualified faculty, we needed to have a lot of affiliated faculty. And of course, it's an interdisciplinary program. That's where the interdisciplinary relationships began. And since then, we've really concentrated at the faculty level on building those research-based, center-based relationships among different colleges and schools and departments. What that has translated into is not only projects and funding. We have colloquiums every week that our doctoral students attend and faculty attend, and we invite each other. So a lot of relationship building, essentially. So how does that translate into dollars? Well, we were able to fund our PhD students. We also have about 4 or 6 per year. And we know that that's not a revenue process. You don't have a PhD program and make money. We realize that. So in order to keep the interdisciplinarity and to help them be competitive and capitalize on resources that are already out there, golly, half the classes that they take are in other departments. So So again, those are based on those research relationships. Funding arrangements happen sometimes where we can share students and take in some students to fund. But, so where do we get back to your question? Where does the money come from? These deep collaborative relationships have translated into, at the master's level, and we have about 230 students, which is half of which are MPA traditional students, the other half are career MA. So take after that, about 100 MPA students. We've been able to capitalize on these relationships with these other units and the faculty to administratively cross-list classes. And this is a real nuts and bolts in the weeds kind of thing. If anyone's interested, I can tell you how we do it. But we have a butts and seats revenue budget also. So what we've been able to do in the best of these relationships, which is actually a few of them, not only do we split the enrollments or make them equitable, so we get our students, they get their students. Say a class with City Regional Planning is a great example. We split the enrollments. CRP students, the enrollments for master students go back to them. Ours come back to us. And every other year, one of our faculty teaches the class. Every other year, one of their faculty teaches the class. So it's a true resource sharing. And that's at the master's level, and then we're fun. Everybody wins. And those master students love these classes too.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. So this isn't strictly a public sector issue. In Syracuse, we're facing the exact same issues. We have a new chancellor, so we're undergoing a massive strategic planning process at the university level. As part of that, I'm chairing a working group on professional programs. So I've had to dive into our RCM system more than I might have otherwise and find out a lot about the nuts and bolts. And so one of the things that is universal across the campus is nobody likes it, and everybody thinks it is an enormous barrier to doing anything interdisciplinary. And the more I learn about how RCM actually works, the more I see that the perception is a huge barrier. But in terms of the actual flow of dollars, it's really just at the margins. So you're absolutely there are issues with which you have a cross-listed course, the prefix to the enroll under, and all of those sorts of nuts and bolts things. But there's not really all that much money at the end of the day moving from one school to the next. And it also doesn't operate at all within schools. And I don't know if that's the same in other places. But there's no question that the perception that we lose massive amounts of money if we do anything interdisciplinary or collaborate with other schools does create a barrier. So I think that's also part of it, is getting people to understand or doing presentations, some sort of education about how it actually works and what the actual economic consequences are. And at the end of the day, the fact that if you grow the programs, you're just cannibalizing from your existing programs and now sending your existing students to another school, yes, that is a negative. If you're getting more students explicitly because of these interdisciplinary opportunities, then you're still going to come out ahead when you realize those sorts of initiatives.
Well, I'd like to sort of follow up on your, if I can use your inelegant term, butts and seats. I mean, that is what RCM is about, with responsibility center management. I don't know how it is at Syracuse, I don't know how it is at Ohio State. At University of Arizona, RCM, the unit of analysis, what they call the responsibility unit, is the college. It's not the department, it's not the school, unless the school is freestanding. So for us, it's the school, it's the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences. So if we're working with sociology, I mean, it's the dean and the dean's council who are really divvying up the revenue. And what they want is to promote collaboration. And they want to see PhD programs or master's programs that are collaborating rather than competing. They can create incentives at their level for that to happen. But even without that, I think you're absolutely right that it's perception far more than anything else. I mean, I listen to the chairman of the history department. Oh, we can't cross this city. We'll lose huge amounts of money. No, you won't.
Right.
You're not. It's just not going to happen. It's going to be very, very marginal difficult.
All of my classes are cross-listed, every one of them. My appointment is split between the School of Public Affairs and the School of Sustainability. So the money doesn't even occur within the same college. Somehow ASU's figured it out, and it's magic. I don't know how they've done it. Their argument is just get the people enrolled in your class, we'll figure out the money. And you've got me wondering that I need to ask questions about how they've done this, because my previous institutions, there were lots point to take away. It is you. It's a non-starter. You just cross this.
Where's your salary?
Get people in both places.
Yeah, well,
Both
that's
places.
simple. Yeah.
We started doing joint appointments as well, and I think this is the collaboration.
Clearly a big issue.
Yeah, but along this, though, when we talk about interdisciplinarity, we can think about how we encourage students to do it, but at the faculty level, it's really important too. And more often than not, I hear, well, I can't publish in this sort of journal because it's not going to count the same way as publishing in this sort of a journal. And I can say that one shift that has been positive within ASU is that the focus is more so on the impact of the journal, right? And if you're focused on that to a greater extent, rather than the discipline focus, you move away from some of these conversations. However, there is still a certain expectation that you have a foot in your discipline, but we're given lots of latitude to publish in other areas, and by virtue of that, it encourages us to collaborate with people that we otherwise wouldn't.
We have come to the end of our time. I want to thank Carolyn. Carolyn, I want to thank you for putting it together. It was really just a very great experience. I want to thank the audience. Wonderful questions. I love the fact that we have enough time here after the presentation. Well, at least those people on that side.